An NHL general manager says this year's Stanley Cup tournament, assuming it gets played, is going to be the hardest Stanley Cup ever to win. Do you agree? Well, let's dive down that rabbit hole. Julien BriseBois, who once upon a time was the general manager of the Hamilton Bulldogs and now runs the Tampa Bay Lightning, was asked in an interview on the weekend about this year's Stanley Cup tournament. It's a slightly different format. And he said this year, not any shortage of credibility, which was the question. To the opposite, it will be the hardest Stanley Cup ever to win. Steve Milton, do you agree this year's Stanley Cup? They always say the Stanley Cup is the hardest, period. Is this one going to be even harder?
Oh, I think so. I don't think you can argue with that. One thing it won't have is the attrition that comes from starting the Stanley Cup playoffs immediately after the playoffs. So there's been an arrest in there, but that creates its own problems. But I think on top of everything else, the whole anxiety, the whole different situation of being crammed together, the anxiety of, is the guy beside me going to test positive? Am I going to test positive? What does it mean if we do for the team and for me and for my family? Yes.
Bubba?
You know, I kind of agree with Steve, and I think, but more so, not so much on a physical basis, because as Steve brought up, these players have had the better most of 3.5 months off. But I think this is going to be more of a mental grind. Look at what's going on in the MLS tournament, the stops, the starts, the games cancellation, teams being pulled out. I mean, I think every commissioner of every league that's restarting is under the belief, or at least the realistic belief, that we're going to have COVID tests that were our return positive. But are we in a situation where teams are going to have 9 players test positive? 1? We're going to see a grind on these players in terms of stops and starts, which I think is going to happen. And I think the MLS has sort of laid out the groundwork. And hopefully the National Hockey League doesn't go down that way, because when you look several months down the road, there could be a lot of changes en route to winning a Stanley Cup.
Rick?
Yeah, there's no question in my mind this will be the most difficult Stanley Cup to win. The format is basically the same once we get down to the last 16, but it's also the preamble, and a big part of that is the testing, the unknown, what happens when one player does test positive, because it is going to happen. It has happened over the last several weeks as the NHL has entered stage 2 and now stage 3. But Steve mentioned attrition. I think this might be a different type of attrition, and that's those athletes who do test positive. And once you do, you're basically in quarantine for a couple of weeks, and that's going to be a different kind of attrition that teams and general managers and coaches are going to have to stick handle around. But also consider this, the play-in series, which is not considered the playoffs, but it's still a playoff series, those best-of-5 series, you have to win at least 3 of those games and then 16 more games. So a team to win the Cup is going to have to win at least 19 games, and that's never been done before.
Oh, well, yes, except that the 19 games, normally you would have to win probably 16 plus 50 during the regular season. So, look, I disagree. The Stanley Cup is always difficult, though. We're not saying it's going to be easy this year. I think it's going to be the flukiest Stanley Cup to win. I think some team is going to win this that has no business winning the Stanley Cup this year, because you're going to have, as Rick and as Steve have said, you're going to have some positive tests. You're going to have guys who just they're not going to play. This is not going to be the same as we normally see. You're going to see teams, I believe, that suddenly are missing key components, and the opposition is going to sail through, because now all of a sudden you've got 2 or 3 key players who are out because not of an injury that they might have tried to play through in the past, but because of COVID. And I think it's going to be it's a lot of who wins. It's going to be a luck of the draw of who your opponent is and how many COVID cases they have.
Well, it'll always look easier for the team that wins it, Scott. The one I always go back to is when Carolina ended up beating Edmonton, and that was under the old structure, and that was under the old rules too, before the fluid play came in with the lockout. Every single round, it's hard for this to happen over a longer stretch of time, but every single round they ran into a team pretty well. I think there was one round they didn't, that that didn't have its top player or some combination of it. I mean, Saku Koivu didn't play the first game against first series when they played Montreal, or they might have lost that one. When they came up against the Oilers in the final, the Oilers were without the player that had brought them there, the goaltender, and then ended up without a couple of other players too. These things can happen. So it looks easy when you look back on it in a way. I mean, you take a look at the year Pittsburgh won. Still, I think the last time, was it the last time that they won? With probably, on paper, the worst defense ever to win a Stanley Cup. So it does happen in the other format too. So it looks easy, but it's not.
It does happen. The difference to me in this
Looks aren't necessarily easy.
No, but the difference to me in this one is that in the NHL playoffs, you're always going to have injuries. That's one of the beauties of this, that guys play through amazing injuries, and we hear these stories after. The difference is now you're not going to try and play through COVID. So where a guy may have still been around and contributing in some way, not always, but we've seen it. For example, Montreal right now is talking about Max Domi is deciding whether to play. He's going to wait till the last minute because of his diabetes and because of COVID. Well, suddenly Max Domi pulls out. If he does, he's a key player for that team. Whoever's playing Montreal, and I can't even remember who Montreal has in the first round.
Pittsburgh.
Much easier. Imagine if Carey Price now announces, because he's got a young family, like Hamonic or someone else, and Carey Price says, you know what, I'm not comfortable playing. Pittsburgh may not even have to show up. They can send their AHL team then to play Montreal. They're going to win that series. So I think there's going to be a huge amount of fluke in who gets through.
I think there's going to be less. I mean, even if there's 10 players that do it, quite often you go into the Stanley Cup finals and there's more than 10 players hurt, or into the right because of the guys are coming back. Stamkos, for instance, wouldn't have been ready in regular playoffs.
I kind of disagree with you, Scott. I think in the National Hockey League, and especially when you're playing best of 7 series, the cream always rises to the top. I think there could be upsets in the first round because of the shortened 5-game series and those, I guess, those teams in the Western and Eastern Conference that are playing off against each other. I think really the best of the best teams generally, and to me in hockey, always rise to the top. And yes, I guess there was the Monday deadline of all the players that wish not to play. That's going to come and go, and you're pretty much going to know your roster. And I know they've inflated the roster somewhat for these National Hockey League teams. But at the end of the day, I believe it's going to be the Bostons, it's going to be the St. Louis's, and it's going to be the Tampa Bays that eventually are fighting in the Final Four for the Stanley Cup. I would be very, very surprised if any of those minimal teams are able to survive.
I think there's no debate that this is also the most awkward or the weirdest Stanley Cup playoffs, because the playoffs are starting basically after the offseason. I mean, these last 3 months has been the NHL's offseason. And the other thing to consider is, once the teams are in the bubble cities of Toronto and Edmonton, they're not going to have any connection really to the outside world apart from, media sessions after games or going on social media. But they won't be able to go home and, vent to their significant other about, a shift that they didn't play particularly good on, or a power play opportunity that they missed, or even, congratulate or have their family members congratulate them with a big hug or whatever the case is by scoring an overtime goal. Having that segregated kind of playoff mentality, I think, is going to be a challenge, especially for the older veterans of this league that have been used to celebrating with family and friends.
And Rick, I think that what you point out is another reason why I would count this as going to be the flukiest, is because there is such an impact of the crowd in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, especially if you're on the road, it is a huge impact, or at home to drive you. Losing that, I think, takes a lot.
But that's every team. That's every team.
That's
Scott.
every team. No, it's every team.
So it's level. So it should be level. So that's why I say it's level. You've taken away those advantages of maybe playing in a different rink or a different situation or bounces off the boards. Everything's level. So this is why
some crowds are way different. Bubba, some crowds are way different than other crowds.
Absolutely. But it's leveled now, right? So the best teams, the teams that are the most talented, are the ones that should go the furthest.
And the teams that it hurts the most, are the ones at top. Those Bostons, the Tampa Bays, the top teams in the Western Conference that are not going to enjoy that home ice advantage. But now that there's no fans, yes, as Bubba was saying, everyone's on the same playing level. There's no Jimmy's in row 89 of the second level to cheer on the Sidney Crosbys of the world. No one's going to be cheering.
Maybe the Leafs will win a 7th game now.
That's could be. What about, here's a question for you, Steve, though. We've heard a couple names already of guys who are not going to play. They've opted out because of concerns for their health. What happens if, and we don't know, and by the time this video comes out, we could have our answer already, but what if a superstar, I mean, like one of the top 10 players in the league, were to announce that he is not going to play? Not only, we know how that would affect his team. How would that affect his reputation? Because we're telling them, hey, listen, if you're not comfortable, don't play. But you tell me that if Sidney Crosby or Carey Price announces they're not playing, that their reputation is not destroyed in these times.
I think if, given that it's hockey, and given that sort of, and we talked about this, about this at least on 2 other shows, about hockey in itself would have higher percentage of players play just because of the nature of the, I would say, obediency of players, and that whole thing about being part of the team, and the team is everything, blah blah blah. Even if you just joined the team 3 minutes ago, suddenly they're your army outfit. I would think that would go into the consideration of anybody who decides whether or not they're going to play for health reasons, and then the health reasons to them would have been so compelling that that I don't know that they would even worry about their reputation. And what does reputation do anyways? Really, what does it do?
Okay, Steve, wait a second. Austin Matthews announces he's not playing, and you're going to tell me that in Toronto everybody goes, oh, okay, we feel good for Austin that he's taking care of himself.
You mean he would be booed? He would be booed? Do you think he would be booed? Is that when the regular crowds come back, you think he would be booed? Maybe.
I think some fans would boo him, especially if they lost to Columbus in the first round. I know Blue Jackets fans would be happy, that's for sure.
I think this is a free pass, guys, for this year. This is something that we've never gone through. This isn't like Sidney Crosby or one of the players saying, "Hey, I don't want to play the All-Star game," and then everyone gets in an uproar. Oh, the stars should be at the All-Star. This is a different situation. This is a life and death situation. This is something that affects families. There's I think a full knowledge and acceptance, as we've talked about earlier, in the NBA as well too. When you go into this bubble environment, you may not see your family for 3 or 4 months. So I do believe that at this time, and if to use Austin Matthews as an example, I think people would have that acceptance of saying, first of all, the guy's already been sick. So if he were to pull out of the tournament, I think he would be like, you know what, that really sucks that he's not playing for us. But we understand it because this is COVID. This is something we've never dealt with before. This is something that's killing people.
And you bring up a good point too, Bubs, mentioning the NBA. You know, Joel Embiid is one of the stars of the National Basketball Association with the 76ers, has gone on record to say, I don't agree with what the NBA is playing or what the NBA is doing. I don't think it's going to work. People are going to get sick. Yet he's still going in to the tournament because he wants to help his team win an NBA title. That says that's still the main goal of him and his team. So there'll be some hockey players. There'll be some baseball players. There's going to be some football players in the NFL. Certainly, there's some probably in the MLS who went into the tournament thinking, man, this is a bad idea, but I'm still going to play because I want to win.
We tend to lionize people who play, give one up for the team. Yeah. And I agree that this is a special circumstances, but over time it may not be. So I think that's a little codicil to all this. So this guy could have an issue with that if he doesn't play. And I think probably it would land where there might already be issues and suspicions. I don't think there's any issue or suspicion about Sidney Crosby, but on some other players there might be.
Steve, spell codicil.
CODICIL.
Oh, yeah, there you go. See, he's a writer.
I'm guessing.
I think you guys are giving a little too much credit to the average sports fan. I think if Austin Matthews, even though he's already apparently tested positive, if Austin Matthews or Mitch Marner says, sorry guys, my family's concerned for me and I'm concerned for me and I'm out, I think the blowback is severe. If Connor McDavid were to do it, if Sidney Crosby, I'm not saying everybody, there's a lot of guys that can do it and we won't blink at, but there's 10 guys maybe that I don't believe can. I don't believe they can, and even though we say we can. We're going to find out the list. Bubba, what did you say it was? Was it Monday?
That's 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. So we're going to find out. We will have already known by the time you see this video. We're taking it a little bit before, so we will see. I don't think there's going to be any big names, though, that pull out. That'll be my guess. What do you think? Is this going to be the easiest or the hardest or the flukiest or the something elseest Stanley Cup to win? And do you think that a big name could have pulled out of this, or would there have been just too much pressure not to do that? We would love to hear from you. Our Twitter handles are on the screen. They'll be coming up again at the end. And by the way, don't forget to subscribe. You can do it right down below so you get notifications of all of these videos that come up whenever we do one. We do appreciate you watching. We will talk to you soon.